Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Today is the 30th day of December, that is 2022. And what I'm going to do is read a little bit from Tavistock today, Institute. And I wanted to make you aware that basically you've been programmed for a long time. In fact, all of us have been programmed in one way or the other. And what do I mean by programming? I mean it basically your thoughts are not your thoughts. You've been told certain things that you think is true. You believe that you live in a free country. You believe that your home, that is your house, you own it, but you don't. See how far you get when you don't pay the property tax on it and see who owns it. You're just a slave on a plantation, folks. That's what you are. Reality should actually wake you up, but most of you won't wake up. You won't wake up. You just won't. You love to be in a nebulous world, so to speak, even though others in the past have tried to warn you, and yet you will not be aware. So why am I doing these videos? Well, I hope that one or two or three people would come to the knowledge as simply as that they have been lied to, and they would take action. So that was what Mr. John Coleman did. He worked for Tavistock Institute. He was involved with them. He wasn't an outsider. He was an insider. And he was involved. He realized he couldn't do this anymore, so he had to spill the beans about it. So we're going to read chapter 19 today and see how far we can go. And so I hope you enjoy. This is information that I'm using to help you to understand how much you've been deceived. There are only a few of us out here to do this, folks. Just a few of us. We're talking about 0.001% probably. It's even that much. So chapter 19 says, is history being repeated? The case of Lord Bryce. With historians heavily involved in either defending or damning the war in Iraq, it might be a good time to ponder the case of Viscount James Bryce, a highly respected historian who sold out and went to his grave as a confirmed, dastardly, unrepentant liar. Before his unfortunate involvement with Wellington House, Bryce had enjoyed wide respect as an honest historian. From the start of World War I, stories of Germany atrocity filled British and American newspapers. By far, the bulk of them were prepared by Wellington House and spread through media channels. Are you aware that almost all the news stories, folks, these days are not coming from reporters, that is, investigative reporters? They're being given information and they read it out. They never check the sources. And most of it's done by the military industrial complex. Are you aware of that? Most kids these days are so dumbed down, they wouldn't know how to write these type of papers. There's very few people who can do this. Mostly they were supposed to have emanated from eyewitnesses' accounts by reporters and photographers who accompanied the German army march through Belgium to outflank the French defenses in their drive on Paris. And the question you may ask yourself, why did they try to outflank the French? Well, there was the Maginot line, which was basically what France had built between this line between Germany and France, an underground bunker system, basically to protect itself if Germany decided to attack them. It's a great idea, but the Germans knew that, and they just went around the flank. Eyewitnesses described German infantrymen spearing Belgian babies on their bayonets as they marched along singing war songs. Account of Belgian boys and girls with amputated hands, supposedly to prevent them from using guns, abound. Tales of women with amputated breasts multiplied even faster. At the top of the atrocity hit parade were rape stories. One eyewitness claimed the Germans dragged 20 young women out of their houses in a captured Belgian town and stretched them on the tables in the village square. where each was violated by at least 12 Huns. This is what they have to do. They always have to give a name to belittle a group of people, you see, while the rest of the division watched and cheered. At British expense, a group of Belgians toured the United States retelling these stories. President Woodrow Wilson solemnly received them in the White House. Their story horrified America. Nobody thought to check their account of the rape they had witnessed. Their account of the brutality they allegedly had suffered were never questioned. The Germans angrily denied these stories. So did American reporters with the German army. In 1914, Wilson had not yet managed the battlefield. Reporters, unlike George Bush in the invasion of Iraq in 2002, there were no embedded reporters with the British Army. Tavistock has had yet to learn how to censor the truth by embedding selected reporters with the troops. This is what they get paid to tell lies. When British journalists' dispatch began to be published in England, throwing doubt of the atrocities, Northcliffe came, that is, Lord Northcliffe, came up with the idea of appointing Lord Bryce to head an inquiry board to investigate accounts of German atrocities and report back to him. Actually, the suggestion came from Edward Bernays and was approved by Walter Lippmann. Then after 1915, the British government made it official by asking Viscount Bryce to head a royal commission to investigate the atrocity reports. Bryce was one of the best-known historians of the time. He had written widely praised books on the American government and on Irish history, sympathetic portraying the Irish people's hard fate under British rule. In 1907, he had worked with the Anglo-Irish diplomat Roger Casement to expose horrendous exploitations of Indian people on the Amazon River by British rubber companies. From 1907 to 1913, he has served as British ambassador in Washington, where he became a popular, even beloved figure. It would have been hard to find a more admirable or admired scholar who had established a reputation of honesty and integrity as Bryce. Bryce and his 6 fellow commissioners, amalgam of distinguished lawyers, historians, land jurists, analyzed 1,200 depositions of eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen all manner of atrocity, that is, the German behavior. Almost all the testimony came from Belgians who had fled to England as refugees. And there were some statements from Belgium and British soldiers collected in France, but the commissioners failed to interrogate even a single one of these eyewitnesses. That task was left to gentlemen of legal knowledge and experience, that is, the lawyers, since the asserted crime took place in what continued to be a war zone. There was no on-site investigation of any of the reports. Not a single witness was identified by name. The commissioners said they were justified in the case of Belgians by the fear that they might be German reprisals against family members. Wow, what an excuse. But British soldiers' witnesses remained equally anonymous for no apparent reason. Nevertheless, in his introduction, Bryce claimed that he and his fellow commissioners had tested the evidence severely. Nobody suspected that the military witnesses were not to be tested at all, let alone severely so. No reason for ever given for such a grave lapse in what Tavistock has since characterized not as a lie, but as a misstatement. The Bryce report was, they always do this, guys. They never tell the public that they actually lied. There usually simply would be like a misunderstanding or a misstatement, as though it was now a little white lie, you see. The Bryce report was released on May 13, 1915. British propaganda headquarters in Wellington House near Buckingham Palace made sure it went to virtually every newspaper in America. Do you ever get the idea that the British actually continue to control this country, even back then, supposedly we're free? You ever notice that? Everything they dictate to us, and we go crawling back to them. You ever see that? As I was pointing out last night, Ronald Reagan would help Margaret Thatcher when they actually had a war to save the Falkland Islands. And the United States military was in some ways helping them, or our satellites up in the sky, or our special planes that actually can see those things actually on the ground. The impact was suspendous, that is, as the headlines and subheads in the New York Times made clear. Germany atrocities are proves Von Bryce Committee. It's all in all caps. Not only individual crimes, but also premeditated slaughter in Belgium. Young and old mutilated, women attacked, children brutally slain, arson and pillage systematically. Countered by officers, wandering firing on Red Cross and white flag prisoners and wounded shot. Civilians used as shields. Wow. They used that back then, didn't they? They used that also in the war in Iraq, didn't they? Wow, this is amazing. In May 27, 1915, Wellington House operatives in America reported to London on the outcomes of their massive propaganda initiative. Even in papers hostile to the Allies, there is not the slightest attempt to impute the correctness of the facts alleged. Lord Bryce's prestige in America put skepticism out of the question. Charles Masterman, chief of Wellington House, told Bryce, "Your report has swept America." Among the small number of critics of the Bryce report was Sir Roger Casement. It is only necessary to turn to James Bryce, the historian, to convict Lord Bryce, the partisan. Casement wrote in a furious essay, "The far extended, baleful power of the lie." By this time, Casement had become a fierce advocate of Irish independence. So few people paid any attention to his dissent, which was dismissed as bias. Clarence Darrow, the famous iconoclastic American lawyer who specialized in winning acquittals for ostensibly guilty clients, was another skeptic. He went to France and Belgium later in 1915 and searched in vain for a single eyewitness who could confirm even one of the Bryce stories. That is, increasingly dubious, Darrow announced he would pay $1,000, a very large sum that is in 1915, more than $17,000 today, to anyone who could produce a Belgian or French boy whose hands had been amputated by a German soldier or a single child, or either sex that had been bayoneted by German troops. There were no takers. Not one victim came forward to claim the reward, although Darren has spent a considerable amount of his own money in advertising it far and wide. After the war, historians who sought to examine the documentation for Bryce stories were told that the files had been mysteriously disappeared. Yeah, surely. No government official or department offered to start a search for the missing documents. No, they don't. It's over. They did what they wanted to do. I'm not saying that Germany's right, but it's amazing what the Brits do. And they've been doing this too. That's why, but it's not just the British, it's those that are behind them. It's those that are behind them. Those that have actually already taken over the government in key positions, put their own men in. So in reality, it's not even British people. They're just doing it for money. Meaning there's someone behind that curtain, just like in the Wizard of Oz. Same thing, folks. Goes over and over again. The blatant evasion of putting the severely tested documents to a new or thoroughly impartial test prompted most historians to dismiss 99% of Bryce's atrocities as fabrications. One called the report in itself one of the worst atrocities of the war. Most recent scholarship has sealed down the percentage of the Bryce report's fabrications because it turned out that several thousand Belgian civilians, including some women and children, were apparently shot by the Germans in the summer of 1914. And Bryce more or less accurately summarized some of the worst excesses, such as the executions in the town of Dinant, D-I-N-A-N-T. But even those later day scholars admit Bryce's report was seriously contaminated by the rapes, amputations, and speared babies. They blame this grave lapse on hysteria and war rage. This amounts to giving Bryce a free press. The numbers of corrections that had to be made by critics of Darrow's report was less than 1% and failed to clear Bryce. As was pointed out at the time, 99% of Bryce's commission report were lies. Correspondence between the members of the Bryce Committee survived the disappearance of the document. It reveals severe doubts about the tales of mutilation and rape. These serious doubts were never spread across Britain and America in the matter of Wellington's House brutally reports. One of the committee's secretaries admitted that they had been given numerous English addresses of Belgian women supposedly made pregnant by German rapes, but in spite of intensive searches, was not able to locate a single one on the list. Even the highly touted story of the member of parliament sheltering two pregnant women turned out to be fraud. Bryce apparently brushed aside this negative evidence as Bush and Blair were to do scores of times when, on rare occasions, a few reporters did their job and asked awkward questions. Yes, I remember that. Lord Bryce, the scholar, should have known, and almost certainly did know, that tales of spearing babies, raping and cutting off the breasts of murdered women were standard hate the enemy fables, hundreds of years old, as were mass rapes in fields and public squares. Even a curious examination of Napoleon's campaign in Europe brought out hundreds of these types of atrocities, a very small fraction of which turned out to be true. Bryce, the learned historian, the learned, trusted scholar who had a reputation for honesty, should have rejected such fabrications out of hand. He most certainly knew that the vast majority of the atrocity stories emanated from the Wellington House, that is the former forerunner of the Tavistock Institute. Instead of examining their origins and then dismissing them as propaganda, Bryce grouped them all into a report that found them generally factual and then issued general condemnation of the German army and people. This is reminiscent of Mr. G.W. Bush in his general classification that the entire population of several Muslim states belong to an axis of evil. Yeah, they do this every time, folks. It's war fever. They want your soldiers, they want your sons to go to fight wars. That has nothing to do about freedom, neither. It also benefits the corporations or whoever it is to plunder others and take their valuable resources. It's the same thing that's going on in Ukraine. The so-called leader of Ukraine, which as far as I can tell, is nothing but an actor, and it's a joke who he is. He's just a character. He's playing a role, and he's fooling people. It goes on. People don't ask questions like, what's going on here? What's going on? No, it's just accept it. And the other sad part simply is the American people, that is the soldiers, go out fighting for something that basically never existed. Why would the United States ever get itself involved in a war in Europe when no enemy actually killed anybody here? No submarines came here, no ships came here, no airplanes came here. Think about it. Until actually the war started, and then we declared them a quote unquote an enemy. Then there were some subs that came across near the Pacific, near Los Angeles, some things that happened on the East Coast, but very small, even with that. And yet they told lies that American soldiers went to fight World War I and World War II. And those quote unquote, those battleships that were in Pearl Harbor, those men died not knowing what really was going on. Many of them were not even pursued to even try to save their lives. They were used as cannon fodder. So why didn't Bryce dismiss the fabrication and concentrate on the German executions of civilians? As we have stated, he knew the bulk of the incidents were products of Wellington House and had to do it. And had he done so, it would have opened up a very sticky subject of the wide use being made of propaganda by the British government. There was an important reason why Bryce chose to abandon the honorable course instead of sullying his reputation. A high percent of the Belgian army in 1919, 14, and 15 was made up of home guards, that is, partisans who wore no uniforms except for an insignia pinned to their shirts or hats. The Germans, desperately trying to win in the West before the invading Russian army smashed through their lightly held lines in the East, were infuriated by these seemingly civilian combatants and showed them no mercy. In other words, someone was dressed up. We're not even dressed up, showing that they actually were soldiers. Interesting. That the German army was entitled to return the fire of a civilian or even initiated by the rules of war under the Geneva Convention, applicable at that time, was never brought out in the press. The fact is that in 1915, partisans right up to 1945 were fair game. Civilians, even with badges pinned to their hats, were not given authority to shoot at soldiers in uniform or afforded protection. Yes, that was what the rules of war laid out in the Geneva Convention, and Lord Bryce and his commissioners knew it. Nor was this important fact trumped across England and America in the matter of the propaganda that successfully captured the hearts and minds of the British and American people. Some German field commanders obviously lost their heads and retaliated essentially against whole towns such as Dinant, D-I-N-A-N-T. But in defensive sorts could be mounted, even for these men. The ensuing debate as to what the Geneva Convention allowed would have produced yawns in newspaper readers. They wanted what Bryce gave them: blood and lust, rape and horror perpetrated by the German beasts against women and young children and unarmed civilians. They wanted proof that the German Hun was a barbarian, a savage beast. And if the public had not been deceived, Wellington House and the British government war effort would have been in deep trouble. The Bryce Report unquestionably helped England win the war. Unquestionably, it swayed the opinions of the American public and convinced millions of Americans and other neutrals it was translated into 27 languages that the Germans were ugly beasts in human form. God, it's amazing, isn't it? No one except a few biased outsiders such as Sir Roger Casement and Clarence Darren ever reproached Lord Bryce for the victorious lies he has spread around the world. No fair-minded man could ever forgive Bryce for sullying himself. Through it all, Wellington House remained in the background. Few people knew of his existence, let alone his vital role. But it had done an important role, that is, a job, and struck a mighty blow for brainwashing. As for Bryce, he went to his grave loaded with royal and academic honors, a solid superior liar, a man who has soiled himself and with the blood of millions on his hands, a brilliant scoundrel, a thief who stole the truth from a public entitled to know it, and who managed to evade detection and exposure and the ultimate condemnation that was universally afforded to Julius Iscariot. From a perspective of 100 years, we ought to take a much harsher view of this man. The Bryce Report had obviously connections to the British decision to maintain the blockade of Germany for 7 months after the armistice in 1918. Are you aware of this, folks? Causing the starvation deaths of an estimated 600,000 people, and very young and elderly young Germans, all part of the game plan to so weaken Germany that it would never be a threat to the Allies again. No, it was a threat. There would never be a threat to Britain, you see, because Britain was afraid of their quote-unquote economic power and had to eliminate them. The Wellington House propaganda lies about the German army was far and away the greatest atrocity of World War I, and it made every German man and woman hunger for revenge by creating blind hatred of Germany. Bryce sowed the Bryce sowed the dragon's teeth of World War II. That was part of their plan. Now let's go to chapter 20 here. So I continue to share with you this important, valuable information. Is that what transpires here is now to do with the chapter 20, the Black Art of Successful Lying of Gulf War 1991. From this background, what we saw in the Gulf War around 1991 was frightening enough to be a very forceful reminder of the origins of the black art of successfully lying practiced by Lord Bryce and what a congenial, willing liar he had turned out to be. It also brought to mind how Wellington House and then Tavistock set its seal on brainwashing as a tool of war. It was one of the deciding factors that made me determined to write this work and expose Tavistock and his injuries' baleful influence. In the Gulf War, the U.S. Department of Defense shut out all news media and appointed its own spokesman who gave its grossly untruthful version of events via television broadcast. I dubbed the fellow Pentagon Pete, and he talked lightly about collateral damage and used Tavistock phrase being tried for the first time ever. It took the public a long time to catch on to this meaning: human casualties, human deaths, and destruction of property. Then we had a break when CNN was allowed to come in and report on the success of the Patriot missile defense shooting down Iraq Scuds, which it turned out was another base exercise in propaganda. According to CNN, at least one Scud attacking Israel was shot down every night. Only World in Review in the midst of the war reported that not a single Scud missile had been shot down. Nobody dared to report that a total of 15 Scuds, which is their missile system, had hit Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. Disinformation and misinformation prevailed. Only the WIR reported the truth, but with a small readership, it didn't matter to the propagandists. That is the World in Review. Then there was the gigantic fraud perpetrated on the American people by one of the largest public relations companies in Washington, the Hilton and Knowles. That is Hilton and Knowles, Knowles. Here again, only WIR broke the story that the whole tear-jerking episode of Iraqi soldiers pulling out newborn Kuwaiti babies from incubators and throwing them on the floor was a gross falsehood. It's interesting that like Benton and Bowles and Hilton and Knowles had long ties to Tavistock Institute. Both companies were leading advertising agencies. Do you get it? Bernays was also the same way. He was what we call in his advertising exploitation here in America. The Hilton and Knowles fabrication, tearfully narrated by an eyewitness who just happened to be the teenage daughter of Al Saban family Kuwaiti ambassador to Washington, was what swayed the Senate to violate the U.S. Constitution and give Bush the elder permission to attack Iraq, despite the fact that no such provision existed in the U.S. Constitution. While Bush the elder could say, well, I didn't know this, I didn't hire Hilton and Knowles, he plainly knew all about the key propaganda stunt pulled off against the American people. Nobody would ever believe that he did not recognize the 16-year-old daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who he had met before. The Kuwaiti ambassador paid Hilton and Knowles $600,000 to stage the elaborate fraud in front of the Senate, for which he ought to have been arrested for lying to a Senate committee. What was so galling is that the daughter also went unpunished for her part in tearfully recounting her experience. I saw the Iraqi soldiers pull the newborn babies out of the incubators and throw them on the ground, she said. The fact of the matter was that this particular lady had not been anywhere near Kuwait for years, and certainly not during the war. She had been in Washington, D.C. with her father at the ambassador in Washington residence. Yet this child liar and her father were not prosecuted. That is what the propaganda experts at Tavistock called a successful remake of events. Her testimony, her name being Naritaal Sabah, testimony became the centerpiece of a huge media campaign in America. It is known to have swayed not only the Senate, but put the American people on the side of the war against Iraq. Bush the elder indulged in the old propaganda piece in telling the world that Saddam had to be removed from Iraq to make the Middle East safe. Remember that Wilson sent American troops to the depths in France to make the world safe for democracy. Bush the elder suddenly began vilifying and demonizing the Iraq president to suit the purpose of his oil cartel friends. As in the case of the Kaiser in 1913, it worked. Not many people remember the ploy put on by Wilson. Otherwise, they might have noticed the striking similarities in what President Bush was saying and what Bryce told Wilson and what Wilson told the American people to sway them to support World War I. Now that Hussein is all but forgotten and the threats he allegedly posed have all been dismissed as a pack of lies, all of a sudden it is Al-Qaeda we have to worry about. Always changing the narrative here. Woodrow Wilson used plain propaganda when he told the reluctant American people that the war would make the world safe for democracy. Wow. Yeah. We've been at war many times, folks. Bush intoned the same variable deceit. The cost of making the world safe for democracy was horrendous. Professor William Langer, Langer, placed the known death of World War I at 10 million men and women soldiers and 20 million wounded. Russia alone lost 9 million men, killed at an astonishing 75% of its army. That would have meant simply as if they were killed at an astonishing 75%, they had a total of 12 million people, 12 million. So they only had 3 million left. The total cost of the war in dollars has been figured at $180 billion, to which must be added the indirect costs of 151, 612, $500,000. So that's my conclusion today. And I didn't want it to go too long. Usually I tend to go elaborating here, but I just want to do a smidget today. And that's about 30 minutes, so most people can actually swallow this and understand what it's being told. Because I can do this all day, so to speak, until my voice gives out, so to speak. But what I'm trying to say simply is, war is a dirty business, you see, and it's always been about taking from someone else or destroying someone else that has not actually attacked you. You see, it talks about the Germans that were actually in Belgium, but did they attack? Did they attack England? Think about that. Did they attack the English people? Did they go in their ships and get on the channel and go over there and attack them, or by airplane? Well, after the war started, and it was a war declared, yes, they did do that. Not ship, but with airplanes, which in a lot of ways, think about what took place at Dunkirk. The idea that Hitler had the British where he wanted them. And if it hadn't have been for the courageous people of England doing that is getting in boats and all kinds of things, rafts and whatever, get over there to the channel to save these people. But in reality, he could have mopped them up and it had been over with. Because he was deceived himself. He was deceived thinking that he had admirers in Britain that would eventually bring down the government in Britain. He believed that, is what I've been told. And it's interesting in that whole way of seeing it. He also didn't have anything against the English people. It's always to do with the government, so to speak. And I'm not saying Hitler's a great man either. That's not the point here. You see, he believed in the quote unquote British propaganda that he was admired in England. He was also under the impression that I'm trying to think of his name, who flew in a single airplane over to Britain, thinking that the people would rise up then. And all it happened simply as he was thrown into a prison. And eventually, after the war, he was killed. And I'm trying to think of the guy's name, and I can't think of his name. He was an important figure with Hitler. And he flew over there. And why did, the other thing simply is, why was the airplane allowed to come in? That is, why was it not, they had radar, you see. So that's another question you got to ask yourself. But anyway, they were not going to let him get out. They were not going to allow him to get his story out with the American people, with the British people. They always controlled the narratives, folks. They always have. And you have to understand simply today, the media itself is controlled. It's completely controlled. It's contrived. It's to get you to respond the way they want you to respond. You see. And why they call their news networks a lot of times programming. It's right out in front saying they're programming you. They're fooling you. You see. So it's interesting. What took place is simply is that it's just amazing how propaganda can be used over and over again. And I remember when the situation that took place with the Middle East. It was always simply as another bad man. It was what's his name in a cave that causes atrocities. That's baloney, folks. That's all baloney. That's almost like cartoons. You think about it. And I can't think. I right now can't remember his name, but the whole idea is simply, he's in a cave, such and such, and he was doing this by computers and this that. It's all bull crap. Al Qaeda and all this stuff. They make these names up, folks. They do this. sometimes they actually create other armies themselves, the United States, to cause them to be the bad guys. Are you aware of that also? Are you aware that there's money spent to create an army that is they have with the CIA to do this? And then what happens is the people of those countries are the ones who suffer. So, yes, I have a comment from Christine Lotz saying Germany declared war after the atrocities committed against German nationals in Bromberg and Danzig. Women, children, and elderly were brutally attacked, probably by the Bolsheviks and infiltrators. Yeah, that wouldn't be surprising. That's the other question you must ask yourself. Why did the quote unquote free world, supposedly the French, the British, the Americans, had an ally named the Soviet Union, which was formerly Russia? Why were they involved? They didn't have any part of this whole thing. You see, why would the so-called free countries will associate with a barbaric or a communist government, as we would say? And then guess who benefited after the war, World War II? It was Soviet Union. They took all the Eastern countries. They took what I call, what was it, Poland, all the Baltic states, that is Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They took parts of, they took Czechoslovakia, they took Romania, they took Hungary, they took Albania. And these countries, there's one other one I'm trying to think of, Bulgaria, that's what I'm thinking of. So they took all these countries, and even took part of Germany, being East Germany. They're the ones that benefited from all this. You see, the communists did. They benefit and put these people in slavery. And yes, I remember, yes, Christine, I just was told here, she's stating here, Madame Albright stated that 500,000, that is the children slaughtered, the Iraqi children, was it worth it? And she said, yes, it was. She posted on nationwide TV, Madame Albright, Secretary of State, who said it was worth what we did, the slaughter of 500,000 children in Iraq. Wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute. Does life mean anything to these people? I don't think so. I think simply is they love death. These people love death. Maybe you need to look into Madeleine Albright and what she's about. She's just passed away, as far as I know. I remember watching it with a CBS News correspondent, a woman correspondent with her, and the question, I think it was Leslie, her name was Leslie something. Anyway, asking her the question, was it worth it? And she said, well, yes, it was. Not even a hint of sorrow for what happened. Just very cold in a remark in what was taking place. So you have to understand that these people would do this. And wait a minute, another question. Do children actually pick up arms and shoot people? No, it's usually trained army soldiers, such and such, do things of this nature. You know, the atrocities are unbelievable. You also should look into a movie I posted here recently about what took place with. I seriously doubt what my country and other countries apart during the Allies in the Second World War, the atrocities done by the British and American aircraft. It was used over. The war was already over, folks. It's almost decimated. But the whole idea was to do, is what Eisenhower was to continue to allow the Eastern countries, that is Russia, Soviet Union, to take all what it wanted. And that was why Patton was so upset. Like, no, this is not right. We know they're a communist country. We know what they do. We know they were worse than even the West, we thought. But then you look at yourself and look at what the West is, you kind of wonder, were these also communist agents working in here? Do you remember the plan? Do you know the plan, what they did? What they call the book called Other Losses? Look it up on Amazon, Other Losses. And it talks about what Eisenhower camps were all about after World War II. And also the enormous belittlement of the people after the war, and probably 2 to 3 million soldiers died, German soldiers, at the hands of Eisenhower death camps, if not more. And those that tried to escape to the West were brutally done wrong, and then those who couldn't escape were taken by the East, that is Soviet Union, and they were taken to the gulags, and they were eliminated. Also look into a book called Death by Governments. How much each government does to its own people, how they kill their own people. The atrocities that the Soviet Union did is unbelievable. They didn't have, if you remember, they didn't even trust their soldiers with guns. Did you know that? Do you know when they were in the front line, they didn't have enough guns at first and enough bullets? And what took place was this. If the guy got shot in the front line, you took the gun. And then someone was behind you if you got shot. So that they didn't have enough weapons, so to speak, or even enough ammunition. This is why 9 million of these men died in the First World War. And you think about not only that, think of this, that they quit the war. In 1918, the Soviet Union left. Now, I might be miscorrect there. I probably these 9 million was probably killed in the Second World War because the Germans kept going into Soviet Union, so to speak. But anyway, I could talk all day about this. And the whole plan of what they did with Germany also after the war, World War II. They divided the country up. We couldn't trust them. So one part was French, one part was British, one was American. The British even knew that what we were doing was wrong, what was Eisenhower camps was all about. Look up the book, Other Losses, and it's actually, Amazon has it out there, and they're talking about the atrocities that the Eisenhower camp did to the German soldiers. And the name of the author is Other Losses, Investigation into the Mass Deaths of German Prisoners at the Hands of French and American after War II. And the name of the writer, this was written in 1989, his name is James, James, I'm assuming Bacquer, Bacque. I don't pronounce that right probably, but yet you need to look at this. Other Losses caused the international scandal when first published in 1989 by revealing that Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower policies caused at least the death of some 1 million German captives in American and French internment camps through disease, starvation, exposure from 1944 to 1949. To 1949. The war is over in 45, folks. As a direct result of the policies of the Western Allies, who with the Soviets ruled as the military occupation government over partitioned Germany from May 1945 until 1949. Attempted book-length dissertation of Other Losses was published in 1992, featuring essays by British, American, German revisionist historians, Eisenhower and the German POWs, Facts Against Falsehood, edited by Ambrose, I can't get his name here. However, that same year, Bacquer flew to Moscow to examine the newly opened KGB archives, where he found meticulous and exhaustive documentation, new proof that almost 1 million German POWs had indeed died in those Western camps. One of the historians who supported his work is Colonel Ernest F. Fisher, the first 101 Airborne Division, who in 1945 took part in the investigation and allegation of misconduct by the U.S. troops in Germany. Later became a senior historian in the U.S. Army. And forward to the book, he states, starting in April 1945, the U.S. Army and the French Army casually annihilated by 1 million German men, most of them in American camps. Eisenhower hatred, that is, his hatred towards Germans, passed through the lens of compliant military bureaucrats, produced the horror of death camps, unequaled by anything in American military in the past. And actually, there is now a third edition of this particular copy, the third edition, because it's been, I guess, been published a few times and it runs out of copies, and then there's still people want to read the book. So you see how all this has been, yes, the Morgenthau plan to eliminate Germans, correct. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm pro-German. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that the atrocities have done. The Eisenhower camps, folks, were, I read the book. Eisenhower camps were not buildings, folks. There were no buildings built. Do you understand that? These people were kept in a barbed wire deal, and they were put in a certain area. There were soldiers all around them, and they were denied food by people in the countryside who wanted to bring food. They were denied food by the Red Cross who wanted to help. They were denied any type of semblance of treating anywhere. There is no place to go to the restroom here, folks. It's a latrine. And this is what happened. They were slowly starved to death, or either they died of diseases of either doing what simply is with the whole idea of the filth that was all around them. And this is what your army is about, folks. That is at that time. One man had that much power. You might want to research who Eisenhower was all about. Look at his history. You might find it simply is he's involved in some other atrocities too, especially under the administration of Herbert Hoover. You might want to look at that, to deal with the bonus army, what took place there also. There are three major people that were involved: MacArthur, Patton, and Eisenhower. That was in the 1920s, folks. You see. Yes, the Morgenthau plan to eliminate Germans. Not only did we kill them on the battlefield, but now we killed them after the war was over to eliminate them. So look up who Dwight Eisenhower is and what his connection is to the family. You might be surprised. He's not what you think he is. And the other thing people have to ask the question is simply, why was Eisenhower, this is a question that I've posed, why did Eisenhower move up the ranks so quickly when this happened? Think about that. Why was he allowed to move up and be the commander general of all the forces of the Allied expedition forces after they landed on the French side? And basically what they did was he became the master general, and he slowed the progress of the American attack upon Germany. He allowed the war to go longer than it was supposed to. He did it on purpose. Patton made comments. Give me the gas. Give me the gas so I can go on down here and get rid of, defeat them. But that wasn't the whole approach. It was just slowly as a meat grinder with Dwight Eisenhower. And then the other thing he was elected as president too later on as some type of war hero. If you look at people's closets, folks, you might be surprised. That guy named Bill Clinton, the state of Arkansas, and what he did to those who went against him, trying to point out the truth. They were killed. Same thing, folks. Same thing. Same thing. So anyway, I need to stop here. It's about 50 minutes, so I appreciate your attendance. Thank you, Christine, for the excellent comments that you shared here today. Appreciate you doing that. Very kind of you. Thank you for helping my memory. And yes, the atrocities that we have done. And yet the sad part simply is the United States military still has over 200, if not 300, military installations around the world. Think about that. And we claim that it's because of trying to protect the sea lanes. Or is it, quote unquote, to prevent other countries to be free? You see, truly free. All right, guys, thank you. Have a good day. And probably within the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'll probably do a video also in dealing with the other subject I've been exploring. And that is the the idea that, not the idea, but the whole idea that simply is that the Redemption Manual 4.5 also. So it's cloudy today. It's actually raining a little bit. So I can't do a whole lot today outside, but I can do a few things inside. So hope you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, please pass on the video to others so that they can actually educate themselves. Thank you again. Take care.